Hello, my name is Mira Sethi, and this is my debut collection of short stories. Are you enjoying? I am so honored that Morningside College selected my book for their one book program sort of initiative this year. So thank you for that. I am really excited to be talking to all of you students about are you enjoying and the process of fiction and writing and just the craft of fiction. Who would I recommend my book to? So I would recommend this book to young people who are interested in learning about Pakistan, about the sort of Pakistan with a lowercase p. The Pakistan that we hear about and read about in newspapers is the official narrative. And I think this book has unofficial narratives. How do Pakistanis live and love in a country where so much assertive self-expression is frowned upon? How do you be yourself? That is the fundamental question that this book asks. This book is interested in identity. How are young urban people navigating identity in Pakistan? So anybody who's interested in learning how young aspirational Pakistanis are actually living their lives should read this book. It's a really good question. I think one of the beauties of fiction is that it uses artifice, i.e. plot, narrative, in order to get at truths and in order to tell the truth. And I love that juxtaposition of using artifice to tell the truth. My stories are about the lived realities of the lives of Pakistanis. So Breezy Blessings, which is the second story in the collection, is about an actress on the set of her first major TV show. And I remember when I did my first major TV show, which is now about 8 years ago, I remember developing a quick rapport, a close kind of an immediate intimacy with the makeup artist, because they hover around you with their brushes and they bring you the gossip from the set. And when I went back home to Lahore, I was inspired to write Breezy Blessings. Now, the plot of Breezy Blessings is entirely made up, right? But the sights and sounds of what happens on the set of a TV show in Karachi are basically from that experience. So they are very much about the lives of Pakistanis. The dialogue is, I think, in some places, I've even used clunky English in order to gesture at the ways in which Pakistanis speak to each other, to gesture at class. And so I've tried to bring a very real picture of Pakistan, I hope, to my readers. So these characters exist in the shadows. And that was the whole idea. The idea of writing about them was to bring them out of the shadows. It's tough because there's a lot of censorship in Pakistan. And I think one of the reasons my book has yet not sort of faced backlash or faced sort of the wrath of the religious right is because it's written in English, and English offers you some degree of protection and insularity because it's read by a certain class of people. So I just want to put that out there as a kind of just flag that. And yes, I wanted to basically write about the narratives that you just never hear about, right? Who are the two most famous Pakistani women? Malala and Benazir Bhutto. Benazir Bhutto, who was assassinated by the Taliban, and Malala, who was shot in the face by the Taliban. Those are the narratives that you hear about Pakistan. Queer people living closeted lives, those are narratives you almost never hear. So that's sort of the picture that I wanted to portray. And yeah. And to convey a sense of solidarity, like when you have a surveillance state, when you're being surveilled by your aunts and uncles and the state and your friends and universities, how do you get to be yourself? How do you live between and around the rules? And these queer characters are living between and around the rules. Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think it's tricky because when I write fiction, I don't write fiction specifically, and I'm not talking about political journalism or sort of op-eds. I don't write it with an impulse to necessarily educate in inverted commas. I write because I find it thrilling. I write because I find it challenging. I write because I'm inspired by an image. I think good art should not set out to solve problems. It should, however, formulate the right questions. And that is what I have tried to do in Are You Enjoying, which is how are people living in the shadows? How are people improvising identities as they go along? How are people living and loving? Why is desire radical in the context of Pakistan? Why is women's desire radical in the context of Pakistan? So these are the questions I've tried to ask. And my activism is something I do in parallel to my life as an artist. And I think also that, you know, we are who we are. So my political beliefs come out in my writing without me having to consciously bring them out. I think one of the beauties of short stories is that in an ending, a good ending in a short story gestures to a new beginning. All the short stories I've loved, like Jhumpa Lahiri's work, Chekhov's work, there's an Indian writer who I love, Akhil Sharma's work. These are all short stories that leave you wanting more, the endings of which leave you wanting more. And I think life is anticlimactic. I think life often doesn't give you closure. And a lot of readers have said to me, and some have complained to me, that my endings don't offer closure. But to me, that is life. I wanted to have a low key fading out in my endings instead of something concrete saying, well, here is the lesson in this short story. Here is the resolution in this short story. That's often not how life plays out. If you read Chekhov's work, it's almost entirely plotless. You know, it's kind of weird and strange and surreal, and the beauty of his work is lies in the surrealism. And I just wanted my endings. I wanted my readers to fill in the endings for themselves. It's a really good and it's a difficult question because they are privileged. Sony is incredibly privileged. ZB, for those of you who read it, is a very privileged woman, but she's also a strong matriarch who's struggling in her own life to she has a dream. She wants to run for political office, but her husband has been hogging that space for so long. And so, you know, this sounds trite to say, but privileged people too have face issues. Privileged people too have traumas. Privileged people too have difficulties. And it's not to say that it's not to sort of say that they alone have these difficulties, but I wanted to show also how ugly we are in the privacy of our own lives. So in the title story, Are You Enjoying? Sony is in this relationship. It's taboo. She's hiding it from the world, but she's so deep in it and she's struggling, as is Usher, her sort of gym instructor boyfriend. And I wanted to show the suffocation of that. I wanted to show her kind of being at a loose end. I wanted to show her addiction to Xanax. And I do wish that the material reality of my characters were slightly more varied. I think in these 7 stories, 3 are definitely, 3 to 4, I would say, are talking about people from the upper classes, the middle to upper class. And I wanted to also show like how the ways in which they talk to their house help, right? The class divide. But I also wanted to show how class sometimes doesn't offer protection in a country like Pakistan. If you are speaking out against the religious right, class will not offer you protection, right? So I wanted to show all of that. And I also fundamentally wanted to show how ugly people are in the privacy of their own homes. From life. from life. Like, some of them are inspired by my extended family, from the people I meet in the show business industry, in the world of entertainment in Pakistan. They come from life. And one of my grand aunts, I don't want to draw too close a parallel to my own life, because everybody is very interested in autobiography, but I don't know how helpful it is. It's interesting at the level of gossip, which is like, oh, look, she took this from her own life, but the level of sort of literary analysis, how helpful is it? It's unclear to me. One of my grand aunts ran for political office many years ago, and she's been a politician many years ago. My mother is an elected member of parliament in the Punjab province of Pakistan. And my eyes and ears are always open to what's going on around me. But is Sayyida Zarina Bukhari my mother? No, she's a bit of a caricature. My mom's not like that. So yeah, I mean, I keep my eyes and ears open, but my plots are entirely constructed. Yeah, I think it's a really good way to put it. Intergenerational conflict. ZB is a feudal from a certain generation, and she has a certain way, which is that, yes, she's a strong matriarch who wants to get on with her life, but she also, the distance between her public life and her private life is vast, and she's a bit of a hypocrite, I would say. There's a line in A Life of Its Own, which I actually would like to read. Just give me a second. So ZB and Farah go to meet the girl who has been marched naked through the street to avenge her family's honor. She's been marched naked through the street to avenge a different family's honor, right? And so ZB and Farah go to meet her family. And ZB really throws her weight around in the interaction with that young girl's family and with that young girl. And on the way back, I'm going to read a little bit from A Life of Its Own. In the car, ZB was quiet, puffy, jeweled fingers around the handle, face to the fields. The balancing act of subtle terror and sudden kindness, the gaudy command of local sensibility, the concealment of the self to make room ceaselessly for the personality. These were the facts of ZB's life, but she seemed not to know, much less want, a more authentic life. This idea, the concealment of the self to make room ceaselessly for the personality, I think this is where I wanted to really show the intergenerational divide, which is Kashif and Farah are of the social media generation, right? And that he's constantly holding his mother to account. And she really chafes at that. And I think this is sort of, if you look at the way Pakistan is rapidly urbanizing, yes, there are feudal families that hold a lot of political power, but in 10 years, in 20 years, they will have much less power because of the way Pakistan is rapidly urbanizing. And we used to have two political parties in Pakistan, among which the political sort of electoral balance rotated. One was the PPP, which is Benazir Bhutto's party, and one was the PMLN, the Pakistan Muslim League. And now we have the PTI, and I am not a fan of the PTI because it's a kind of center-right party. But what the PTI has done, the current party which is in power, it's kind of broken the hold of these two parties, right? So it's a third party, it's an urban party, it's a conservative party that's come into power. But this is the new Pakistan, which is now the old order of dynastic politics is kind of slowly is slowly going away. And ZB represents kind of the old order, and Kashif and Farah, her children, have come in. Kashif has come in from the West. He's left a lucrative job from the West, and he's also has some of the values of the West, right? He's holding his mother accountable. So the new generation of Pakistanis, I think, certainly from that class, I wanted to show are different from their parents' generation. It's a really, really good question, and one I sort of struggle with and don't have clear answers for. I think when I am in Pakistan, I sometimes feel like an outsider in the sense that because I've had a Western education, I have sometimes have the privilege of having the tools of an elite liberal arts education that some of my colleagues, say in the entertainment world, haven't had. But when I am in the West, I also feel like an outsider because I am very, very desi. I am very, very Pakistani in my sensibility. I wrote an article for Vogue magazine in March or April of 2021, in which I said that being in the US, being in San Francisco means speaking relentlessly in English, communicating the clutter of my inner life in a language that houses my intellect, but not my heart. And I think that is sort of my fundamental state of being, which is that I think in English, but my emotions are often communicated in Urdu, and I feel life through Urdu. And I think in this book, the sensibility suffusing this book is not one is not an English or Western sensibility. I think it is a very South Asian Pakistani sensibility. So I often feel like an outsider here. Um, and in the West, I too feel like I'm bringing Pakistan to them. And I think as a non-Western writer, you have to ask yourself a question early on in your career, which is, above all, do I want to be a bridge maker? Above all, do I want to be accessible to the West? And for me, I've been published by Knopf, I've been published by Bloomsbury, so I can't say I don't. But I never want to be a bridge maker at the expense of the idiosyncrasy and subjectivity and authenticity of my characters. I think it is to a large extent tied up in language. Thank you for actually bringing that up, because I'll just give you an example. So, for example, you will never find the following sentence in an English language novel. And then Mira reached for the donut, comma, a deep fried, ring shaped dessert. Because we have been imbibing Western culture all our lives, the world has. We know what donuts are, so nobody will ever explain what a donut is. However, you may find the following sentence in a South Asian novel. And then Mira reached for the gulab jamun, comma, a deep fried milk curd dessert. That's, there's an asymmetry of power there. The West has exported its culture also because of colonization for decades, for hundreds of years actually now. And so the challenge in writing in English for the world is always comes down to language, I think, at a fundamental level, because so many of the things we take for granted, the West doesn't know about. And so I think it's really challenging often, because you're not just bringing a culture to an audience that doesn't necessarily know about it, you're also constantly translating language, and you're code switching, and code switching is hard. I mean, there are so many dynamics in terms of just, actually, for me, fundamentally, it comes down to language. And you sort of gestured to this. Describing the weather is easy, right? You describe the weather, there's nothing complicated there. Describing an emotion like love is easy. But dialogue, I think dialogue is where I struggle a lot, because we often speak in a mishmash of Urdu and English. I certainly speak in both Urdu and English when I'm talking to my friends, my husband, my parents, and converting that sensibility, right, is hard. Um, so a lot of my characters speak sort of broken English in my collection of short stories, particularly in the story Breezy Blessings and A Life of Its Own, because we're dealing with characters who aren't comfortable in English. How does one do that without your readers, your Western readers, thinking that you're making a mistake or this is clunky? A lot of the criticism of this book has been that the dialogue feels clunky. It feels clunky because I'm bringing a certain sensibility to you. So for me, dialogue is very challenging to write for that reason. Nobody has asked me this question before, and it's a brilliant question, and I've been hoping somebody would ask me this. Um, One has a lot of help when you are filmmaking. You have a makeup artist, you have a director, you have co-stars, more importantly, you have an editor at the end of the day who then edits the narrative. So you have a lot of people pitching in to make the narrative whole and interesting. When I'm writing, I am entirely alone until a very later stage when my editor comes in and says, all right, let's edit this. It is also much harder because visual narratives give you so much without you having to do any of the work, which is why we're all addicted to Netflix, which is why we're all constantly watching shows. When a group of writers get together, they ask each other, so what are you watching these days? Almost, it's very rare that they say, so what are you reading these days? That question feels so dated now. And so for me, when I'm acting, I feel like I have a lot of help around me. I am not a director and a filmmaker, so I am the vessel bringing the narrative to you as an actor. So for me, I get a script and I perform. When I'm writing, I have to create everything. I have to create Jack and Jill or Jamil and Jamila. Then I have to put them in a house. Then I have to throw problems at them. Then I, as the author, have to solve those problems for them. And that is a really difficult thing to do, but I mean, it's also hugely enjoyable, which is why I do it. But I think television, the reason we're living in the golden age of television is because it's fun, it's quick, it moves. You don't have to do any of the work. But I think when you commit to reading a book, you also have to commit intellectually and emotionally to doing a lot of the work. You read a sentence and you have to process it. Your mind has to process it. And so when I write, I often don't know where I'll go. I'll often go down these rabbit holes and then I'll have to extract myself from a particular thorny situation because the narrative isn't going anywhere. And then I'll have to start again. I am currently reading a book called Down Girl by Kate Mann, which is nonfiction. Kate Mann is an American-Australian feminist philosopher, and she's talking about misogyny. The subtitle is something around the lines of misogyny and what it means, and it's fascinating. I could talk about it, but yeah, so that's what I'm reading these days. I really want to read more feminist literature because I want to educate myself. The most difficult part for me, and I think this is different for every author, is being okay with uncertainty. When I begin a story, I honestly don't know where it's going to go. I don't write in order to think. No, hang on. I don't think in order to write. I write so that I may know what it is that I'm thinking. So the writing is what actually leads to the thought. For a lot of writers, they know exactly what they're going to do. They have the structure and then they dive in. And sure, they also sort of, face difficulties and then they have to go back. But for me, it's very much the writing that leads to the thought post haste. And the most enjoyable part of it is creating characters and living with them and seeing what they're doing and just sort of occasionally chuckling at their foibles and their quirks. So the advice I would give young writers is you have to have a lot of patience to see a book through. You have to be okay with uncertainty. When you're struggling, put it away and come back to it. When you put it away, I often say that going away from my work actually breeds a certain fertile forgetfulness. You're still thinking about the work when you're not actively engaging with it. When I'm showering, I think about my characters. I think about, oh, this is how I can tie up a loose end in the plot. So I think you have to have a lot of patience. You also have to have faith in yourself. And don't write if it doesn't excite you. I mean, if it doesn't excite you, then don't do it. If it excites you, then this is the right profession for you. The most fun to write, fun being the key word here. I think I really enjoyed writing Breezy Blessings. It was the first story I wrote. And I really enjoyed writing the title story, Are You Enjoying? I think I went really deep in that story. It's almost novella length. So those are the two stories I really enjoyed writing. Two reasons. One is that it's a colloquialism in South Asia. We often say, did you enjoy? Are you enjoying? We don't say like, hey, did you enjoy the dinner party? Or did you enjoy the burger? We just say, did you enjoy? Are you enjoying? So it was a way again to give the way in which we speak sort of focus and give it sort of center place, essentially, to bring that colloquialism to the world. Are you enjoying? And also, because I think it gestures at the spirit of the stories. I think a lot of people have said that they're sort of fun and they move along at a nice clip. And I think the title gestures at that. And also, I think after Mina painted this wonderful painting, if you look closely at the expression on this girl's face, it's one of ennui, it's one of boredom. And that juxtaposed with the title was something I was very interested in, because Soni, in the title story, is often feels adrift. She's kind of addicted to pills. She's often in her own mind. And to me, this kind of looks a bit like Soni. She's surrounded by so much privilege and lives in this gilded world. But the expression on her face is one of melancholy. And that juxtaposed with the title felt very nice. Oh, wow. I would love for it to be shot in Karachi, in Pakistan, and in other cities as well. Like A Life of Its Own is in a fictional town in Punjab, so it would have to be shot there. I don't have any actors in mind necessarily off the top of my head, but I think I would like to play maybe Farah in A Life of Its Own. I think I would love to play maybe even Soni in Are You Enjoying? And I would love to get some younger actors, some maybe queer actors, to play some of the queer characters in my work. I wanted to actually thank Morningside College for choosing my book for their one book author program. I was very touched when Anne wrote to me. Being a woman in South Asia, you know, having kids, being a woman in South Asia, having students in Hong Kong read my work is so meaningful to me, because maybe if the university hadn't chosen my book, this book wouldn't be on your students' radar, on the folk, all of you who are watching this video. And thank you for engaging with my work. It means so much to me that you had a glimpse of what life in Pakistan is like for young urban people. And I hope that we can continue this relationship. And I hope that you continue reading authors from the rest of the world, because I think this is actually the whole point of literature. Is Cheryl Strayed, who wrote the book Wild, said that when you know someone's story, they refuse to be unknown to you. And I think that is so powerful, this refusal to be unknown. And I hope that with Are You Enjoying, you have glimpsed a side of Pakistan that you otherwise wouldn't have. And I'm very, very grateful to Morningside for bringing my work to Hong Kong and to students who are studying at Morningside. So thank you.